Welcome back to Around the Shoe. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis on the Bill and Doug Show, joined by two great members of the Ohio State media. This week, Joey Kaufman of the Columbus Dispatch and Stefan Krijisnik of Cleveland.com. Joey, thank you for being here on Around the Shoe.
Good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Joey, how long have you been covering Ohio State?
Since 2019, which was Ryan Day's first season. So in terms of neatly overlapping with a coaching tenure, that was my first year, which is good for my brain.
Yeah, that is good. So you just ignore. People are like Urban Meyer, and you're like, who?
I waited out the 2018 fall and then arrived after that, which seemed wise.
Yeah. But you did miss the donuts. Bill, he missed the free donuts when we were standing around in that building waiting to find out if Urban was going to be fired or not. Remember those donuts?
Yeah. The thing everyone remembers about the 2018 offseason, the free donuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Worth it. Stefan Krijisnik, how long have you been covering Ohio State for Cleveland.com?
Yeah, I've been covering it for about a year and a half now. I joined right ahead of the 2024 season. I started in June 2024, but I didn't actually move to Columbus until like the middle of fall camp. So I made the joke with people on the beat last year, especially those who have been covering Ohio State for a while. Winning national titles is pretty easy. You just kind of show up and it happens. So, you know, the people who had gone 10 years covering Ohio State and never saw a national title, it's pretty easy. Just step in and they win some games.
Yeah. You think everybody here's a bunch of losers.
Hey, I got a national title my first year too.
Ooh. All right. I guess Joey and I didn't win national titles our first seasons on the beat. Sorry. Yeah. You guys were grand marshals of the parade. I remember that. Stefan was like coming down Lane Avenue. So we're here to do Around the Shoe. We do 5 quick hit topics on Ohio State. We invite these wonderful members of this robust Ohio State media to join us every week. And so we have our 5 topics. Number 1, in this Penn State week, Joey Kaufman. We know Ohio State, Michigan. We're all thinking about Ohio State, Michigan. Ohio State's thinking about Ohio State, Michigan. But Ohio State and Penn State this will be the 33rd straight year they will have played. They are not going to play in 2026 and 2027 because they have not been designated as rivals. Outside of Michigan, who do you believe is Ohio State's number 2 rival right now?
I'm surprised you didn't do this for Illinois week, this line of questioning.
Wooden turtle.
But I guess now that it's Penn State, I mean, I don't really consider Penn State much of a rival for Ohio State. I remember doing a story in 19, my first year, where there was 2 professors who did this academic study to measure the intensity of college football rivalries. And I was looking that up earlier. But you get 100 points to assign if you're an Ohio State fan and responding to the survey. And the Ohio State fans were served like 90-something points to Michigan. It was the highest percentage of any school dedicated toward one opponent. And this was a time, 2019, where things were good for Ohio State in the rivalry. The name Connor Stallions hadn't entered anybody's vocabulary, and Michigan was still commanding that much of their attention. So I don't see anything remotely. When there's so much hatred dedicated to Michigan, I don't think you can reserve it for anybody else if you're going to be that intense about it.
Yeah. So your actual answer is there is none. There's nobody. There is no number 2 rival for Ohio State.
No. I mean, some teams are kind of in vogue for a period of time. Clemson in 1920 was Ohio State fans didn't really care for Dabo Swinney's coaches poll vote in late 2020. And they're in Oregon, I think last year, sort of butted heads recruiting wise. But I mean, it's all just in the moment, sort of general college football living. There's nobody, I think, even in the spectrum of Michigan.
Yeah, it is. It's so gigantic. It's hard to have a number 2. Stefan, do you think there's a number 2?
Yeah, Joey kind of stole my answer there. You know, I know we'll get into it, later about things that we've just noticed, when we joined the beat and differences from previous beats and stuff like that. Like, I think immediately when you join the Ohio State beat, you realize that this rivalry has a sense of like hatred that very few do. And like, there is no such thing as rent free. I think Ohio State and Michigan fans are both like, yeah, we think about you all the time. Like that's
Mhm.
and that's okay. Like that's part of it. So I think it's so that rivalry is so intense that it is hard to find a consistent number two. You know, I wrote about it last year's media days that, you know, between, as Joey referred to there, like on the recruiting trail, and obviously Oregon joining the Big Ten and immediately facing Ohio State that first year and then ended up facing each other twice, that it kind of felt like maybe a mini rivalry could kind of start to brew now that there is someone in the Big Ten that wants to kind of recruit and compete at that high of a level with Ohio State and Oregon, that maybe there could kind of form this mini rivalry that we saw, you know, against Clemson. And Notre Dame maybe kind of is part of this conversation because they've met each other so much in recent years, and obviously the national title game, and there's the Marcus Freeman storyline and all that stuff. But it seems like it's Michigan, and then like whoever you feel like hating when you wake up that morning, that team number two in the conversation.
Yeah. No, I think that whoever, yeah, who do I feel like hating today? Right. That's the number two rival for Ohio State.
If Signetti says something that morning, like he can be your rival that morning, I guess.
Yeah. I think that might be leading us into Bill. Who are you thinking here, Bill?
Well, yeah, I do think it's going to be sort of rotational.
Okay.
For me, the question is not so much like who can be the number two rivalry. I think it's like because I don't really know that there is another quote unquote rival, but who can occupy the space that Penn State has occupied for like the last decade. However Ohio State fans care to characterize that, rival or not, that opponent matters on the field, off the field, for achieving your goals, kind of thing. And now the Penn State's not going to be on the schedule every year, and it's also in this state of flux. We don't know what it's going to be post James Franklin. That spot is very much up for grabs. So yes, it could be Oregon. It could be Notre Dame's a great poll because of, like there's the amount that they've played. They're not going to play a lot during the regular season, but they can meet each other a bunch in the postseason. They recruit a lot of the same guys culturally. I think they are very similar, even if they might not admit it. And like there's a lot of overlap with the staffs, and I think will continue to be. So Notre Dame, I don't know that is gonna go anywhere, but I do wonder if it can be Indiana. To your point, Doug, like because you do need a bit of a, I don't know if villain's the right word, but like someone to like hold up and kind of hate. And I do think Curt Cignetti can be that person. We'll see how much he continues to like lean into that side of his personality as Indiana becomes more and more established, which I think it will be. But for the time being, I don't know that anyone in the Big Ten really likes Curt Cignetti all that much. I think they respect what he's done and respect the rise of the Indiana program from a personality standpoint. I think they probably wish he would just like stop talking. And he's not been that bad this year, but there's still enough carryover from last year too that I do think Ohio State's probably not even alone. But there's a couple programs in the Big Ten that don't sort of love like the bravado of Indiana and Curt Cignetti right now. And I could see that program rising to the level we're kind of talking about. The interesting thing is like over the next 3 years, they're only scheduled to play each other once in the regular season, Ohio State and Indiana, but they can obviously see each other in the Big Ten championship this year. With what Indiana's doing, that could become more of a common thing to meet them in Indianapolis and also possibly the playoffs. So I think Indiana is probably the most fun of the possible choices anyway.
Joey, like, remember last year when Ohio State beat Indiana and the Ohio State video crew had like the Google Me stuff loaded for the video board as soon as that game ended? It feels like there's a little bit of that. Cignetti will poke you, right? He probably needs to beat Ohio State for this to become a real rivalry. But in terms of pokers, is not Curt Cignetti at the top of the list, Joey?
Yeah, I mean, he almost strikes me as sort of Brett Bielema-ish from like the early 2010s, where like Brett Bielema at that time could really needle some Big Ten coaches, and that was an era where I think Ohio State fans and Wisconsin sort of butted heads because you have Ohio State, the head coach doesn't really get into the mud like that. They're very statesman-like. At that time it was the Senator Tressel, and Day is sort of in that mold where he's not going to get out there and throw haymakers publicly with another coach, but Cignetti kind of could be this decade's version of Bielema in terms of willingness to say things into a microphone that would raise eyebrows of the Ohio State coach.
And he only beat Ohio State once. but it was enough that it was like he had the one win when Ohio State was number one. I think he was 1-5 as a Wisconsin coach against Ohio State, but then he did say stuff. And I very much leaned into when Bo Ryan was the Wisconsin basketball coach and Bielema was the football coach, and they were in the same division, I think, in football's legends or leaders or whatever it was. It's like Wisconsin was really like a thing. Like there was like 3 or 4 years there where Wisconsin was quite a pain in the neck to Ohio State fans. And I do think, Stefan, you're kind of making the point like it's sort of rotational. I can also remember between 2011 and 2016, Ohio State and Michigan State were 3-3 against each other. And 2 of the Ohio State wins were 17-16. They were 1-point wins. And I remember asking Urban Meyer or something at some point, like, hey, are you going to ban green pens in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center? Because it's like, oh, you can't wear blue. You've beaten Michigan 10 straight times. How about green? How about banning green? Mark D'Antonio actually knows how to play with Ohio State. I do think it requires somebody. There's a familiarity, there's a dislike, but you have to be a little scared of somebody, I think, to be the rival, which is why I do think Oregon's the most likely one here. That Ohio State lost to Oregon last year, that you just know Oregon's going to recruit on high level, that they are in the regular season schedule in 26 and 27, that Ohio State certainly could see Oregon in the playoff this year. Stefan, I do think like Oregon's potentially like the scariest team that Ohio State would see on any kind of regular basis that maybe could elevate to this number 2 spot just by the fact of maybe they're capable of beating Ohio State 4 or 5 times out of 10.
Yeah, and the way it kind of started, I mean, they joined the Big Ten, they take Trey McNutt from Ohio State's backyard, and then they beat Ohio State the first time they see them. So it was like in the span of, hey, welcome to the Big Ten, you've been here 3 months. Hey, Big Ten teams aren't supposed to do this. Like, you're not supposed to take guys from Ohio. You're not supposed to beat Ohio State. And Oregon kind of came in and did that almost immediately, right, upon joining the Big Ten. So, yeah, the recruiting trail is just, it's such an interesting element to it because no team in the Big Ten throughout the last however many years has been able to consistently compete with Ohio State on the recruiting front. And now here's Oregon with Nike money being like, yeah, we can do whatever we want. I thought Doug was set with the green pens thing. I thought you were setting up to say that they're going to ban cigarettes from the Woody, but that's
I bet they already are.
Industry.
Doug, I'd add this too. With Michigan State, it's interesting because there were 2 years in that decade where they knocked Ohio State out of the playoff, or at least in 15 they knocked them out of the playoff. In 15 they knocked them out of the BCS title game.
Yep.
There's no Big Ten program or really coach that's going to be able to rip Ohio State's heart out in that same fashion the way the sport's currently constructed. There's no weird game in November where events conspire against Ohio State and the other coach has a great night and spoils the season for 300-something days. It just, the magnitude of a regular season loss is not the same as like D'Antonio era at Michigan State beating Ohio State, or even if Indiana beats Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. So what? They're going to play in a few weeks again.
Because that would be like the instigating moment, Bill, right? If Curt Cignetti in his home state beats Ohio State in Indianapolis, and like Ohio State fans would be mad, but to Joey's point, Ohio State would maybe go from the 1 seed in the playoff to the 3 seed in the playoff. And so like maybe the stakes aren't enough to like really stick in your craw that like, oh man, we got to get Curt Cignetti back next year.
Well, that makes me wonder, too, if the answer to this question could be someone who's not in the Big Ten, right? We talked about Notre Dame, but, like, what if it's like I know they're down this year, but like, what if it's Texas, right? What if Texas is on a regular season schedule next year, but they played in the postseason last year? You could certainly see Ohio State and Texas clashing in the postseason many times in the future. Or, I don't know, like
Georgia.
Georgia, certainly. If Miami has like some staying power on the national stage with as much as Ohio State recruits in South Florida, I could see it being Miami. It's not the same thing as a team that's in your geographical footprint or your conference that you see most seasons, if not every season. But maybe with the way that the sport is changing, we have to keep an open mind on what a rivalry could mean. And maybe it just means somebody you see in the postseason somewhat regularly.
Yeah. No, I think that's very possible. And as you guys pointed out, like that really was a thing with Clemson there for a couple of years, that like you don't have to be in the same conference, but you play each other back-to-back years or 3 years out of 5 or something. And it's for really high stakes. It certainly has a chance to be that. All right, let's go to question number 2. Stefan, we will start with you. If Nick Saban hadn't retired and Julian Sayin had stayed at Alabama, Who would be Ohio State's starting quarterback right now in the 2025 season?
This was probably the toughest question you sent on the list, to be quite honest with you, just because the obvious answer in the way they talked about him in the offseason would be Lincoln Keenholz. But I think we would get an honest answer if Julian Sayin wasn't there. And like, would you actually ride into this offseason with Lincoln Keenholz? I guess Aaron Nolan would kind of be the obvious guy you point to, since he was kind of that freshman that first came in, before Julian, and he would be the one that maybe would be in line to start. The thing with Air is like, was his decision to transfer completely based on, Julian Sayin coming in, or were there other factors? Like, I don't know, like maybe he just wanted to go to South Carolina. There's different factors that go into that. Like, would he still be there if Julian Sayin wasn't here? I don't know if the answer is completely, 100% sure a yes. So there's different factors. I think the answer I would side with is probably a transfer guy. Now who that would be, I mean, you look back at last year's class, obviously Mendoza ended up at Indiana. I know Georgia was kind of interested in him, and he had some interest from teams kind of on the recruiting scale. I know Bill, I think it was it at, or one of you guys might remember, were we at the Cotton Bowl when Carson Beck entered the portal? And like, I think there was a report that like Ohio State was interested in, like, what a reality that would be if Carson Beck was the guy at Ohio State. I think my answer is they would have found someone in the portal, which would have been interesting. I mean, for Ryan Day to go back-to-back years with a quarterback out of the portal for a guy who, developed the CJ Strouds and the Kyle McCords and stuff like that, like to go the portal route would have been really interesting. I know Fields was a portal guy, but that, he also came in and was developed too. Like it's not like he was a fifth-year guy like Will Howard who just came in. So it would have been interesting. Portal is probably my answer. Who that would be, I think you can have a fun time kind of talking about a bunch of alternate realities where it's like, I don't know, Indiana's not good because Fernando Mendoza's at Ohio State or something like that. Like it would be interesting to see how the portal cycle would have gone had Ohio State actually, needed a quarterback.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think?
I think it would have been a portal guy. I don't know that they would have just turned it over to Lincoln Keenholz. I don't know. Even over the course of the season where Aaron Nolan was here, you never got the sense that they thought he was a guy who'd be ready to take over the offense as a second-year player. So I just don't think Ryan Day would have left that the chance. Maybe he would have felt, I don't know what the right word is, a little more emboldened, confident, I don't know, coming off of a national championship to just like let it ride out, and maybe it is like Lincoln Keenholz who ends up the starter here. But I don't think Ryan Day would leave that much to chance with this position. So I think he would have gone into the portal. So then again, you just like look at who was there. You can cross off Nico Iamaleava because he was a spring transfer. I don't think they would have waited that long. I think we maybe be able to cross off a guy like John Mateer because I don't know if he has like the high level throwing upside that Ryan Day would have coveted. And I think maybe the same thing is true of Jackson Arnold, although Jackson Arnold is a kid that Ryan Day really liked coming out of high school. So maybe that would have been more of a possibility than I'll give her credit for right now. I think it probably would have been, or at least it would have been Mendoza would have been the guy that like probably tops on the list. I do think like Carson Beck in a different world would have gotten some consideration. I don't know if in the end Ohio State would have been willing / able to pay what it would have cost to get Carson Beck. Perhaps the same thing is true of Darian Mensah, who went to Duke from Tulane and got a ton of money. I think Mendoza, though he was one of the more coveted quarterbacks in the transfer portal, probably would have come with a lesser price tag than some of the other guys as well, in addition to like just from a scouting standpoint, probably being a better prospect. So I think it probably would have been Mendoza. The other one I thought would be interesting is like Miller Moss, who went from USC to Louisville. I think there's a world where Ryan Day, not dissimilar from Will Howard, they're not the same kind of player, but I think like background, what he had done to that point, some of the intangible stuff, I think Ryan Day could have found himself liking Miller Moss, but Mendoza is my pick.
Doesn't it just like make you think, man, Nick Saban sure retired at a good time for Ohio State, right? Because it's like Julian Sayin is the most accurate quarterback in the history of college football, and if he was at Alabama, it might be the guy who went from Tulane to Duke. I don't know. It might be the guy who failed at USC and went to Louisville. If you go through this list of names, and again, it's this thing where I think you can simultaneously feel like, you can get somebody in the portal, or also feel like, oh my God, you do not want to have to go portal shopping for a quarterback. Carson Beck now at Miami. John Mateer now at Oklahoma. Fernando Mendoza now at Indiana. Darian Mensah now at Duke. Connor Wegman now at Houston. Miller Moss now at Louisville. Bo Prabula now at Missouri. Jackson Arnold now at Auburn. I could maybe see a thing where, like, if you brought in, for instance, Miller Moss, that was one of the names I was going to say. Like, would you bring it in, not to bring in Miller Moss to be the starting quarterback, but like, all right, it's Miller Moss versus Lincoln Keen-Holtz. It's like that kind of thing. We're bringing in someone, we maybe even think it's 50-50. We don't want to leave it just to Lincoln Keen-Holtz. And Tavian St. Clair is not going to be ready as a true freshman. And the thing that's hard in this evaluation, I think my answer is probably maybe Miller Moss. But the hard thing about this evaluation is you end up looking at what guys do when they're not at Ohio State. And then it's like, well, is that what they would be? So I'm somewhat influenced by the fact that Aaron Nolan went to South Carolina. The talk when he went there is like, hey, he's going to be one play away behind Lenora Sellers. And then Lenora Sellers actually got hurt, and they played a sixth-year guy, Luke Doty, and started games with him instead of Aaron Nolan. It's like, okay, well, if Aaron Nolan isn't even really the backup quarterback of South Carolina, could he have been the starter at Ohio State? But maybe, because I think we also go through this thing. Well, what if Drew Aller had gone to Ohio State? Would he be better? What if Quinn Ewers stayed at Texas? Would he be better? Right? You kind of do this thing. Well, you think like Ryan Day and this Ohio State system, all these receivers would have elevated a guy. So it can be very hard to judge. But the reason I wanted to ask it is because it doesn't feel like there's an obvious answer. And again, Nick Saban drives me nuts as an SEC blowhard on game day, but Ohio State fans owe him a debt. And even Mark Pantoni was talking about that last week. My vote is Miller Moss. Joey Kaufman, what's your vote?
I actually think we should consider Devin Brown for a moment as the starting quarterback, which, if there's no Julian Sayin, he's probably a more secure backup quarterback. He was very close to starting in 23. So in the absence of an obvious candidate to be the starting quarterback out of the portal, I think there's a pretty good chance it's Brown and he doesn't transfer to Cal if there's no Julian Sayin. That's a pretty unsatisfying answer because he's obviously not the starting quarterback at Cal. And I do think it would be the preference of Ryan Day to develop a quarterback over several years or at least a year and start him. But you look at the 4 times he's needed a starting quarterback in his tenure pre-Sayin, he went to the portal to address 2 of those with Fields and Howard. So I think it could be Devin Brown, but I'm hedging right now and basically talking out of both sides of my mouth.
It's allowed on this show. It's encouraged, actually.
I'm of the portal candidates, I'm most intrigued by Miller Moss because he has a profile which is pretty similar to Will Howard's, where he had starting experience in the end of his eligibility time and was basically run off by his last program, and so would have a little bit of an edge to him. And I think they like that a lot with Will Howard and that type of I have something to prove trait, and Moss would bring that, and then sort of a one final prove it year, which I think that was a good marriage with Howard and Day, and Moss could have maybe fit that same sort of profile.
I think
it is. It's crazy. Go ahead, Stefan.
I think what's interesting about the Devin Brown thing too is like if we went into the spring and it was, let's say it's Devin Brown versus Lincoln Keen-Holtz, we're assuming it's not just handed to Devin Brown, right? Like, does a competition like that, like, would that spark something of like a spring portal interest, like a Nico? Like, do you get through the spring and you're like, hey, Devin Brown isn't really it. Lincoln Keen-Holtz isn't necessarily ready to be a starter. It's hard to envision Ryan Day ever finding a starting quarterback in the spring portal window and being like, all right, you're going to come back from the summer and then you're going to be QB1. Like, it's hard to envision that, but like that's probably the only path to like that ever happening, right? It's like Devin and Lincoln just aren't as good as you hoped, and now Nico's in the portal and you're like, this might be our best option, I guess.
Is there a world where the answer is Tavian St. Clair?
Didn't it really feel like Ryan Day just did not want to be in the business of playing a true freshman quarterback? I thought you got that vibe in August that it was not even like a consideration, and I don't know that would have changed.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't think he would ever want to play a true freshman quarterback. But if there were ever a time to really lean into it, it would have been coming off of a national title, right? And I think he could have gotten away with it. You're like, this is our guy. He's going to go through some bumps, but we have our national championship ring, and like just wait for the payoff 2 and 3 years down the road after this guy starts as a freshman, right? So I think he could have sold it.
I thought about Tavian, but I thought the schedule probably dictated how they would have gone about maybe making their decision with Texas week 1. Or if you had the 2024 non-conference schedule where it's you open against Akron, Western Michigan, and then Marshall, if that would have maybe, you get a longer ramp up period for a true freshman.
It would be like the idea of, I guess, if you just would have let Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz battle it out in the spring, maybe declare a winner, so the loser transfers, and then Tavian St. Clair's the backup, and now you're in a situation where I think Joey makes a good point about, like, we got to play a vet early on against Texas, but then maybe we're on like Trevor Lawrence 2018 Clemson freshman year alert where the starter is Kelly Bryant, and okay, whether it's Brown or Keenholz, that's okay for now. But we're sitting here saying, like, when do you think Tavian St. Clair is going to start? When do you think Tavian St. Clair is going to start? Man, thanks, Nick. Woohoo! We'd be going. Can you imagine, Bill? This fan base would be going crazy right now if we were living in that world.
Yeah. Well, the other name we didn't mention, like, and I guess like it doesn't only apply to this guy, but if Ohio State makes it known to the world that it needs a quarterback, who knows who might jump in the portal? But if Julian Sayin doesn't leave Alabama, maybe Ty Simpson does, and then Ty Simpson could be an option. Like, Ty Simpson prior to this year did not have a body of work necessarily, but he was a pretty highly regarded prospect. So a guy like that, I think, could have become an option for Ohio State too.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting discussion. I don't know. Did Ohio State fans enjoy that discussion? They're like, why are you giving me a knot in my stomach over a thing that doesn't exist? Doug, pick better topics. Next up, why is Arvell Reese so good? See, that'll cleanse the palate for everybody. Actually, next up is we want to remind you, our friends at Roback.com, RHOBACK.com, RHOBACK.com. Cool collection of game day stuff. They got hoodies. They got quarter zips. Like, fall is clearly here. We're in quarter zip season, and they just have like kind of high level Ohio State stuff. If you want to go check it out, it's just fun to look and then be like, oh man, I really have that eye. I like looking at quarter zips online. And it just brings me joy. And then eventually maybe you'll get there. And if you do and decide you want to do it, we got a code for you. BAD20 will get you 20% off your first order at Roback.com. Use code BAD20. Bill Landis, question number 3. If, and I don't even know if there is one, but if there's an area or an issue that you think could trip up Ohio State this season that like is potentially their Achilles heel, what is it?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a glaringly obvious one, but I would say if the offensive line doesn't get back on track, I think is probably the thing that's on most people's minds. Now, like, they're 7 games into the season. The next game they play is going to be November 1st, and we're asking the question of whether or not they have the right 5 guys starting on the offensive line, right? That's not a great spot for a team to be in. I don't think it's detrimental, because I would have said when they lost Josh Simmons and then lost Seth McLaughlin last year, like, well, season's over. Like, we'll see you in 2025, and that's clearly not what happened. So there are ways to work around it and work through it and land on the right 5 and then clean up some of the technique stuff that Ryan Day was alluding to during his press availability last week. But I do think both with the run blocking, with the pass blocking, and then also just figuring out, do you have the right mix of guys playing? That is a rather large, lingering question for Ohio State as it tries to position itself to be playing its best football into the postseason. So, like, aside from that, I don't really know that there is one, but that is one that is definitely front of mind for me.
I'm still a little bit lingering with the special teams. And again, the idea that once upon a time, a made field goal might have given Ohio State another national championship. I just think they are so good in so many areas. And if they play a great team, I think it could come down to, field position battles based on punting. I think it could come down to, can you make a 48-yard field goal when you need to in a tight spot? And it's hard to be great at everything, but it does remain a little odd that as much as Ohio State has, that I don't know that anybody inside or outside the building just like feels super confident when Ohio State's kicking, whether they're punting it or kicking a field goal. So I don't even know I don't know that there's much to be done about that, because we've seen, I think Ryan Day on purpose try some extra field goals in situations to work on this, but I just think it might get into the playoff and Ohio State might be the undefeated #1 team in the country. And if they have a kick in a tight spot. I'm not sure that anybody's going to feel that great about it. So, Joey, what are you thinking about this?
I agree with you because the way the games have gotten shorter in college football, the possessions are fewer, the margin for error is less, and so I think special teams is a good one. I think they didn't play a lot of close playoff games last year, and that I would think inevitably that would change, and you might need a kicker to be able to hit them from close to 50. I'll touch on something different, though. I'll mention red zone offense. When you look at historically Ryan Day's teams, when they've had first-year starting quarterbacks, they've tended to really not always finish drives inside the 20. 21 and 23 were 2 years where they were about 64% offensive red zone touchdown percentage. And 21, that was a big reason why they lost at Michigan that season, was they kicked some field goals in the first half instead of getting some touchdowns. And it was a close game at halftime, but then Michigan ran away with it in the second half. But if they punch it in on some of those drives, it's looking like a different game before the snowfall gets going. And then they've been over 70% red zone touchdown percentage in 22 and 24, probably two of the best teams in recent memory. And this year they're 68%. So it feels like it kind of could go either way. And with a first-year starting quarterback and saying the windows are tighter there, things move faster, and in a shortened game, possessions matter more, everything's more to premium. So if they are settling for field goals in that area in a playoff game, that could buy them instead of punching and getting 7.
What do you have, Stefan?
Yeah, this would be a fun drinking game with friends. It's like, hey, 4 of you get in the circle. The guy who's 4th has to find a 4th thing to say about Ohio State and why the number 1 team in the country isn't good enough. I'll piggyback off Bill's point because like you said, Bill, like you're coming out of your second bye week and you're not exactly sure who your starter at right guard is. That's not necessarily great. I think to add on top of that, against Illinois and against Wisconsin, it's not like Philip Daniels was necessarily looking his best either, right? I thought he was terrific against Texas and for most of the early part of the season. And now you're at the midway point, and here's a guy who's never been asked to play this many snaps and play at this high of a level. And maybe there's kind of like a plateau or dip, whatever you want to call it. And if you got questions at right guard, and it's not like Josh Padilla is necessarily like stealing that right guard spot, right? Like he's still trying to prove himself. If right guard's a question mark and right tackle is not necessarily the best, you look at the schedule and you look at some of the pass rushers that Ohio State could face, whether it be Miami or Indiana or Oregon or, even this weekend against Penn State. They've got guys who can get after the quarterback. They might not be a good team, but they have talented players who could make some trouble. And if you've got questions at right tackle along with right guard, I'm not saying that Ohio State's thinking about putting in Ian Moore or Ethan Owayawa at right tackle. I think that the solution is Philip Daniels play like you played early in the season and not like you played against Illinois and Wisconsin. But you did go into the bye week kind of thinking like, all right, not a lot of questions about this offense. And suddenly you're looking at the right side of the offensive line thinking it didn't look as clean against, Illinois and Wisconsin as it did against, Texas and some of the other non-con opponents.
And Bill, you think we'll get a couple answers about this offensive line this week against Penn State? What Stefan said, it's a pretty good D-line, right?
Yeah, it might be. It's probably the best Ohio State has seen since Texas. Like Illinois has got a decent front, and Wisconsin, I think it turns out, has one too. If you saw what they did against Oregon this past weekend, but Penn State, at least individually, has some higher level talent than those two teams. Now, are they positioned to play their best? Jim Knowles, I think, is really tweaking with that defense to figure out exactly what they want to do and what's the best plan for them moving forward the rest of the season. But yes, it could be. I think it will be a pretty good test of where Ohio State's offensive line is. And I don't think it has to come out of the off week, kind of firing on all cylinders, but you want to see some progress. You don't want to see as many breakdowns as we saw against Illinois and Wisconsin, and you shouldn't. So that'll be the thing that I think I'm watching maybe most closely in that game is what kind of shape the offensive line is in, because how much will they be tested between Penn State and Michigan? Probably not very much, but once you get to Michigan and then beyond, you're going to be tested in every game up front, and you want to be confident in your offensive line's ability to handle that. And there have been moments of like really high level play, as Stefan said, but these last couple of weeks I think have been mildly concerning is the way that I would put it, but concerning nonetheless, and maybe characterized as like not quite where it needs to be if Ohio State wants to accomplish what it wants to accomplish this year.
All right, so we're going to now, for our final two, kind of talk about covering this team, because Joey and Stefan have some experiences, not just covering Ohio State. And again, they're not quite old timers on the beat in the same way that somebody like me or Bill Rabinowitz or Tim May or Steve Hellwagon or guys like that are. So our fourth question is like, what do you remember from your first day or days covering Ohio State? And I'm going to go first with my two quick stories that I remember the most, because I started, I wasn't here for the opener in 2005, my first year. The Cleveland Plain Dealer just took forever to finally hire somebody, so that I didn't get here in time for the opener. I got here for the second week of the season against Texas. And two things that I can remember from that week. One is we were interviewing all of the players, and it was in the Biggs lobby. Like, we're in the back where we like hang out now. They were having interviews in there, and there were sort of one player at each corner of the room. And I can remember looking across the room, and there was a player over in the corner, and a bunch of people were interviewing him, and I didn't know who it was. And I just thought to myself, like, I'm dead already. I tried to study. I did not grow up following Ohio State football. I'm trying to make myself an expert on this. And now I'm in a situation, it's like, come interview the players. And I'm like, he's important, and I don't recognize him. And I almost just left. And then the other one is, they gave me my computer, and they had, they put like a little sticker on the computer bag that had the company phone number on it. And I was here, and I was living in a hotel. I probably lived in 5 or 6 different hotels that fall, until we bought a house, and my wife and my baby daughter moved here. And one of the days I left my computer at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and a staffer for Ohio State found the bag, called the office phone number that was on the bag, and the people at the office thought I was dead. And it was like, well, like, that's okay. The bag's there. The reporter is not. I guess we have to go hire somebody new. And it's like, no, I just left my computer at my job on my second day. And so it was really, and it's like, I'm not sure I can do this. This perhaps was a grave error by the Cleveland Plain Dealer to have hired me. And maybe it still was. So
who was the player?
I was just David Patterson, who was like a defensive tackle captain. And I was just like, why do I not know who that is? And so, and it's because you are terrible at your job, Doug. So, and Greg Gillum, who was a recruiting assistant back then, is the guy who found my bag and saved me. He could have just thrown it in the river, man. It's like, whose bag? Leave your bag here. You're done. So anyway, I was in panic mode for 18 years covering Ohio State at Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. And I'm kind of still in panic mode today. Joey, what do you remember about early days on the beat?
I came during spring practice. April 1st was my first April Fool's Day, and they had some spring practice media availability. I just remember the location, the setting of the way the media interviews people at Ohio State being very different from my previous beat at USC, where you would talk to the head coach just after practice on the side of the practice field in front of palm trees, and just there'd be a gaggle of 8 to 10 reporters, and you just huddled around him, and you just sort of shout some questions. At Ohio State, you sit in the team auditorium. Everybody is sort of in certain seats each week. There's an SID, Jerry Emmett, who would call your name. Just the formality of it was a lot more, I think, tightened up and buttoned up than USC. Just kind of huddled around whoever happened to be on the practice field.
Were you in panic? Were you panicking, or was that just me?
I was probably just in a, I couldn't tell you.
I think it was just he's trying to be nice. He's trying to be nice. Stefan, what do you remember? It wasn't that long ago for you.
I'll back you up. I had a little bit of panic. I vividly remember. So my first assignment was Big Ten Media Days. So that kind of I had done SEC Media Days. So it wasn't necessarily like a jump scare. I do remember my first Ryan Day presser being like, why are there so many people in this room right now?
Yeah.
I never in my life that I think I was going to walk into a presser and I hope I get a question today because there's so many people who want to ask questions like that. I covered Mississippi State. It was like, if I had 3 questions for Mike Leach, I had 3 questions for Mike Leach. Let it rip, So that the size of the beat definitely struck with me first, and being like, okay, well, you better come to the pressers prepared, because it started like that where I think I didn't get a question my first presser, and I was like, all right, I gotta earn it, stuff like that. And then I didn't raise my hand, and Jerry called on me like the next week, and I was like, all right, like now I'm not ready for this at all. Like Jerry, like you got to give me a heads up, my guy. So yeah, a little bit of panic at the start. I like the size of the beat is what just stuck with me. And like Doug, I talked to you a bit about this last week. Like this is not to say like other beats are stupid. Like other beats have very intelligent reporters, but like the level of like football knowledge required to cover Ohio State definitely struck with me, just because there's not a lot of schools where like, hey, who slides into nickel when Lorenzo Styles goes down? Like that, it doesn't like matter, right? Because like, I don't know, Mississippi State's going to play Texas. Like it doesn't matter who the backup nickel is. Like if the starting nickel goes down, you're screwed, and you're probably screwed even if the starting nickel was playing. So it's like that type of stuff too is fascinating to me. Where a lot of places it's like, all right, who's going to start? Like feel good story. Like, hey, this 3-star developed into a starter. Now he's starting against Georgia. Where at Ohio State, it's like, hey, you're 12-0, but Lorenzo's not playing his best. So like, are you going to move Jermaine? It's like, what's it matter? Like that's what there's other schools. It's like, what's it matter? And at Ohio State, it's like, you better be ready. Cause like you might not, I'm not saying everyone has to be like an X's and O's expert to cover Ohio State, but like there is a general level of football knowledge that for me, it was like, you better rewatch these games and like understand what's going on. Cause like, you're going to get lapped when it comes on this stuff.
What do you remember, Landis?
My first day on the beat, like officially, was the opener of the 2014 season against Navy. In Baltimore, I found out that I was going to be covering Ohio State either 2 days or the day before that game was being played. And I can't remember, Doug, if I spoke with you or Ari to like kind of coordinate how we were going to get there, or more specifically, how I was going to get there. Cause I had never really traveled for work prior to that either. Like I had been a high school sports reporter, and like when I did cover college football, I didn't travel to cover road games, never had to like stay in hotels or anything like that. So like all that was very foreign to me. So I remember I was living in Cleveland. You guys were obviously living in Columbus. I drove down, I guess it's 77 to Cambridge, and I met you guys in Cambridge, Ohio, and left my car in the Walmart parking lot, and then hopped into rental car with you and Ari, and Ben Axelrod was also in the car. And we drove to Baltimore together, and I was probably quiet and terrified the entire time because I wasn't 100% certain what I had gotten myself into, both with the job and who I was working with. And then I don't even remember much of like the first game, to be honest. I know it was like a closer game than Ohio State wanted it to be. And I know the first story that I wrote was like Urban Meyer trashing the offensive line after the game, saying the offensive line was not Ohio State standard. And I think that's the first story I wrote. But yeah, it was all kind of a nervous blur for me. I also remember we did like, because that was back in the day with Cleveland.com. We always, and you guys still do this at Cleveland.com, like the stand-up videos, the three of us just like shooting a 3-minute video about what's going to happen. We used to do those pregame. So we had one before Ohio State Navy. It's like, I don't know anything. I know that Braxton Miller's hurt. I know Braxton Miller's hurt and JT Barrett's the quarterback. And that is the extent of my Ohio State knowledge as I get ready to go on this video to talk on the internet about the Buckeyes and pretend that I'm an expert. So there was a lot of fake it till you make it and involved there too, those first couple of days.
And I remember that weekend because that game was in Baltimore and it was on my birthday. And after the game, like I was mad that we couldn't find anywhere good to eat like on my birthday. And I'm sure you were like, oh my God, why am I working with him? My God, he's complaining about like, I don't want to eat chicken fingers on my birthday. I want like a pork chop. It's like, you should have left.
We ended up at like McCormick and Schmitz or something like that, like in the Inner Harbor down there. And like, but they were like, we walked in like 30 minutes before they were closing. And they're like, I guess you can have dinner. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, bro. All right. So the last one is similar, and we're going to have Joey and Stefan talk about this, but like Joey, just like the differences. So you covered USC, like for good and for bad, you talked about it a little bit, like, but the differences of that beat and this beat, how different was your previous college football beat experience to what you wound up doing here covering Ohio State?
Pretty different, and part of that was the way USC functioned at the time doesn't exist in this world of college football anymore. Pete Carroll ran the program in their aughts, and it was very open, very accessible. The practices were open to the media in their entirety, and Tim Tessalone was the longtime sports information director there, and they had a very much an open doors policy, and that largely continued in the decade after that when they hired former assistant coaches Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, and Clay Helton. And I was there Clay Helton's year, so 16, 17, 18. And you could watch the Tuesday, Wednesday practice in their entirety and take attendance, who was there, who's running with the first team, did the quarterback throw an interception today. So in 2016, my first year on that beat, they had Max Brown began the season the starting quarterback, a former 5-star kid who was a fourth year at the time, and he beat out Sam Darnold in a preseason competition. But USC was one of the two at the time, and they were going to play Utah. And during practice, Sam Darnold's taking all the first team reps. And so after practice, they have to make Max Brown and Sam Darnold available to us. And they explain that Sam Darnold's now going to be the starting quarterback. I mean, that was just that sort of thing doesn't exist anymore. And certainly we were not watching the Tuesday, Wednesday practices at Ohio State and taking account of who's taking reps and all that.
Yeah.
Clay's since been replaced by Lincoln Riley, who does not take the same posture toward the local media. So that has changed at USC, but I kind of caught the tail end of some pretty accessible media years. And even after practices, Tuesday would be the day where offensive players could talk, and you would just ask which players you'd want to talk to and catch them coming off the field. Wednesday was defense.
Wow. Ancient days. That's like Tim May tells stories about that from like 1984, like just hanging out on the sideline with the coach and watching all the practice. But to think that it was still happening at USC not that long ago. Stefan, you obviously talked about it a little bit, but like, again, for good, for bad, like just a sea change from what you were doing before, or some similarities.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty different. This might come as a shock to you guys. Ryan Day operates in a much different manner than Mike Leach did. Not very similar personalities, even though they're both prolific, passing attack minds. Leach, for as much as he went viral for some of his interactions with the media, sometimes him just being funny, sometimes him, willingly coming at reporters. He was like very open. Like fall camp, like every practice was open from start to finish. You could basically report on anything that happened during it. His explanations were always funny because he was like, I don't know, I'm going to run Y-cross. So like whether you see it or not, like I've been doing it for 50 years and it's worked. So I don't really care if you like come out and are like, Will Rogers threw a deep route in Y-cross. Like look out SEC. Like you're not going to see that coming from Mike Leach. So covering Mike Leach was obviously a blast. I think the SEC too, like specifically as it pertains to Mississippi State and our paper, the Clarion Ledger, based in Jackson. I lived in Starkville, and we had a beat writer who covered Ole Miss as well. Like it was so fascinating to me. I grew up Northwest Indiana. Like I went to IU, I went to Indiana, but like growing up Northwest Indiana, I didn't really care too much about college sports at the start. It was Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks. For me, as White Sox. Obviously, a lot of people Cubs fans. Like it's so pro sports based that like when I got to Mississippi, I think the most jarring thing for me was like, this is their pro team. Like I covered Mississippi State basketball and Mississippi State baseball as intently as football. Like every recruit mattered, every game mattered. Like that is their pro teams. And I think you get that in a lot of SEC towns, like outside of, I wasn't there when Texas and Oklahoma were part of it. So like, Texas is added an element with Austin, but like, it was really just Vandy with Nashville that was like an SEC team combating with like a city, right? Whereas like so much of these towns, like everything that's going on is revolving around these schools. Whereas, you get to the Big Ten, it's like, I don't know, like there's a lot of people at IU who spent their Saturday, instead of going to watch a crappy IU team play, they drove up because they were going to go to a Colts game on Sunday. Or like in Columbus, obviously there's the Blue Jackets, but also the Bengals and the Browns take up so much space. Whereas like you didn't have that in Mississippi. So that was always the fascinating part for me, like growing up near Chicago and then going to do that. It was like, you walk down the street and everyone knows who you are. Cause like you're covering like the team, like it's Mississippi State football or Mississippi State sports, I should say. And like nothing else. And I think that's a fascinating part of it, but Doug, I came prepared because I knew I was going to talk highly of covering an SEC team and how fun that was. Not that covering Ohio State isn't fun, but I came prepared because I was like, I can't come on Doug and Bill's show and speaks so highly. Oh, wow. Okay. That's jarring to see the Georgia head on you. But I wanted like a stat. I wanted something to give you some level of Big Ten supremacy. Like I needed to bring you some Big Ten supremacy as a Big Ten grad myself. And Joey, you're a Dodgers fan, right? Right.
And a Big Ten grad myself.
So I went through the World Series rosters. Blue Jays, Dodgers, right? And what does the SEC have? Like no questions asked supremacy is baseball, right?
Yeah.
2 guys from SEC teams on the World Series rosters. Kind of 2 guys from the Big Ten. There's a guy from Iowa and there's a guy from UCLA, but they were technically the Pac-12. But we can count that, right?
What kind of? Sure. Yeah.
3 guys from MAC schools in the World Series. So
wow.
I think the MAC and the Big Ten, I think Midwest, now we can cherry pick stats, right? Like I didn't count guys who committed and then went out of high school, right? Like there was a decent amount of guys like that, but like Big Ten and MAC baseball supremacy.
Wow.
I'm presenting that's yours now if you want it, Doug.
Wow. A bonus cram it to the SEC about the World Series. Who knew? What a treat. What a treat to end this edition of Around the Shoe. Stefan, thanks for bringing that to the table, brother. We will work that
I
in.
would have loved to count Kyle Schwarber in that, but sorry.
Come on, man. That's right. We all cherish the days that Shohei Ohtani played for Ball State. So
well, that'll wrap it up for this edition of Around the Shoe. We appreciate Joey Kaufman and Stefan Krijisnik for being here with us. Joey, where can the people find you? Anything you want to promote about what you're doing over there at the Columbus Dispatch?
Just stay tuned for our coverage at dispatch.com. You can find me on social media at Joey R. Kaufman.
And Stefan, what do you guys got popping there at cleveland.com?
Yeah, cleveland.com or cleveland.com/OSU and social media at SKRAJISNIK3. It should be a fun season here down the stretch covering Ohio State. I'm excited to see. I mean, 5 games in November, like that feels like a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of ball. A lot of pumpkins, a lot of ball. We appreciate you guys being here. We appreciate this audience. If you want to follow those guys, please take in their work. If you like Around the Shoe, give us a like, give us a thumb. Make sure you're subscribed so you get all the coverage here about Ohio State and college football on the Bill and Doug Show. But for now, many thanks to Joey, to Stefan, and for Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises. That was Around the Shoe on the Bill and Doug Show.